A guy named Jeff Courtnall, who was a lifetime NHL hockey player, he said, it's interesting. To win the Stanley Cup, you got to have all three age groups work. You got to have the old vets play as if they're a little younger. You have to have the mid-career people deliver. And you got to have the young people be really exciting. The old people get excited by the young people. The young people see the meaning of the old people. And you got to have all three age cohorts working. And so we started looking at game teams where all the decisions are being made by 38-year-olds and the 25-year-olds are told to stay in line. I thought that was usually the formula for temporary success at best.
Welcome to the Gaming Founders Podcast, a show where we interview the founders that have shaped the gaming industry. I'm Eden, the CEO of Pragma. We build tools for studios to connect with their players and essential services, including First Look, our player relationship platform, Connect, and Engine, our cloud and source-based backends that power many of the world's best studios today. If you have an interest in getting exclusive access to the game industry's best early access games, sign up at playtest.firstlook.gg.
And I'm Kevin Zhang, partner at Upfront Ventures. We're a venture capital firm based in LA and San Francisco. I lead game investments both in studios as well as the pick and shovel tools that power game developers and content creators to do their best work, including Pragma. We interview founders on their origin stories, the tactics that help them survive and thrive, and key lessons for anyone interested in building the next generation of leading gaming companies. Learn more and subscribe today at pragma.gg/gamingfounders.
In this episode, we are joined by Bing Gordon, the founder of Electronic Arts. He shares his journey from a childhood filled with sports to becoming a co-founder of Electronic Arts. He discusses how he met his co-founder Trip, the challenges faced in the early days of EA, including several industry setbacks. Bing highlights the importance of marketing and brand when it comes to building a game studio, something that not a lot of our founders have focused on. The rise of console gaming and the creation of the Madden franchise, which became a significant part of EA's success. He also talks about the transition from game development to being a partner at Kleiner Perkins, one of the great venture capital funds. Bing has served on the boards of Amazon, Duolingo, and Zynga, and his stories are truly legendary. I hope you enjoy this episode with Bing Gordon. Bing, thank you so much for joining us on the Gaming Founders Podcast.
Welcome.
I have so many questions, but maybe we can start with your early story and how you got into, I guess, were you a gamer growing up? What did that look like?
But growing up, I had a brother 2.5 years younger than me. We grew up in suburban Detroit where, everybody's front yard was a play field. And we played a lot of one-on-one sports. We made up a lot of sports games. We ruined our mother's furniture. And, we would always be making up games. We played one-on-one football. We played two-on-one football. We played home run derby with, practice golf balls, with wiffle balls, with tennis balls. We never broke any windows, which was surprising, but we did wreck a couple of trees. So I grew up doing that. And as for games, we had one friend who was the worst touch football player, but also was a bookshelf board gamer. And I knew that anybody who was playing games with a hex map was going to kick your ass. So I played a lot of cards. I caddied as a kid, and we had a lot of time sitting around, and that was acey-deucey and spades, and always for nickels. And then when I was in college, I started playing bridge only because on the sports bus trips, one side of the aisle would be playing hearts, the other side of the aisle would be playing bridge, and there would always be like one person on every team who actually studied. And they were the science major who foolishly was trying to do pre-med and sports team at the same time. So I was, cards and a lot of sports games. Wouldn't have considered myself a gamer. And in fact, I read a lot. And when I was in college, I thought I was being a math major. Then I discovered that the math class was taught by a professor with English as a second language, and it was no fun at all. And then quickly went to variables instead of concrete numbers, and I found that to be boring. So instead, I became an English major, and I started writing poetry and stories. And I'd worked at Disneyland my summer out of high school, and we did intramural sports when the park was closed. And I always had this. I always, and we'd have canoe races around Tom Sawyer's Island. And we would use the park, and you kind of imagine the park coming to life in a new way. And then they have these robotic characters that talk. For instance, in Pirates of the Caribbean on Main Street, there was what they called an audio animatronic of Abraham Lincoln, and he'd do the Gettysburg Address. And so when we were walking around the park, when there was nobody but a bunch of kind of 17 to 20-year-old kids, I started imagining all that coming to life. And a couple of years later, a movie came out called Westworld with Yul Brynner that much later got redone and much later became a TV show. But there was the fantasy come to life that all these robots in the park would start operating to give you a better story to live in. And so I got very fascinated with that. And I wrote a poem about a magic piece of glass through which you could travel through space and time. I read all the time travel science fiction books I could get. I really liked Michael Crichton, for example, and Stranger in a Strange Land, and another book called No Time for the Stars. So really early on, before I knew about computer memory, I realized that I wanted to live a save and restore life, and I wanted to live multiple parallel lives. And you can kind of get that fantasy. The first metaverse was books, and in your head you can go through, but you could never change the ending of a book. So you could live in the character. And then in college, I played sports and I acted for 1 year. And again, it was create a world, be inside it, act it out. I thought that was kind of fun. So I'm doing all this stuff, still not a gamer. Read a lot of books, wrote some, thought about structures and rules from all my time playing sports and reinventing sports with my brother Andy. And kind of through a bunch of wandering around, I found myself in a Stanford Business School class where a couple of my buddies from college had gone, and I thought they sold out. But on the other hand, I didn't want to be a commercial fisherman the rest of my life. So I'm sitting in a class with a prof named Peter Keene, who is a decision science professor. And decision science, later kind of became machine learning, but it was all the probabilities of kind of predictioneering and probabilities, with every actor having some kind of goals and state machine and probabilities. Speaking of which, I tried doing that as a major in Yale, and I wrote for decision science class, how to choose a date for the prom. And these two professors gave me a 0 on it, and I think they thought that I was making fun of them. And I asked them, what's wrong with my math? Because I think the math is right. Because, I went and gave people a questionnaire of their decision process and put in guy, parent with you to the prom, person, pet. And, I wanted to see how that worked out. And then I would, I'd predict who would say yes to a prom date. And I thought it was pretty rad. And my friends thought it was hilarious. They gave me a 0. So I went in to see these guys, and they started crying and kind of hugging each other. And kicked me out of their office and said, you need a 75 on the final pass of class. Well, now I'm with Peter Keene, and he goes, we got a few minutes left. I don't want to keep talking about this stuff. You get it. So in the last 15 minutes, let's talk about a real decision. Your Stanford MBAs. Right now, you're living on credit card debt, but in 5 years, money will no longer be no longer be a constraint. We're going, yeah, right. and because we were all used to kind of ramen education. And he said, "So I want you to tell me, if money were no object, what would you do? What would you do all day?" And about a third of the people said, "I'd like to float the biggest debt offering on Wall Street." And guess what? They became bankers.
Yeah.
And about a third of the people did kind of countercultural stuff. I want to open a restaurant. I want to start a rug business. And 5 years later, they were out of industry. So they predicted as soon as they can afford it, they didn't really want to do business. And I said, I'd like to create an adult Disneyland in a virtual space using computers. And the room was dead silent. And he said, "Okay, and who's next?" And he came up to me afterward and said, "I'm sorry that was so awkward for you." And I said, "Awkward?" And he said, "Yeah, didn't you notice? Everybody thought that was the dumbest thing ever." And I went, "Nope, didn't notice." And he said, "Well, in the other class, there's somebody who said something kind of like that, and he wanted to do sports card and dice games on computers. You guys should meet." And that guy's name was Trip Hawkins, and we ended up living together. We did a market research project for the first cartridge video game system, the Fairchild Channel F, dismal failure. And Fairchild gave up on it at exactly the wrong time. But we did that, and he said, "I'm going to start a game software company in 5 years." He went to work for Apple, and I said, "I'm going to start a consumer tech ad agency in 5 business. I'll be your ad agency." He goes, "Yeah, whatever." And so I did that. I started out in Fairchild in a semiconductor business, the only English major doing product management for their most complicated piece of hardware. The Sentry system, the first analog digital device test module. And a few years later, Trip made a little bit of money at Apple. And he said, "Okay, I'm going to start it." And I said, "I'll be your ad agency." And he didn't come inside. So but meanwhile,
Maybe you can paint the landscape, because what was it like to start a gaming company at that time? Can you even raise money for that? Like, were there lots of gaming companies already?
There was a guy named Don Valentine who was involved in Apple and the founder of Sequoia Capital.
Yep.
And Valentine pinged Trip. Trip kind of worked for Jobs. He was the first MBA at Apple. And he wanted to be Steve Jobs. And he went to Steve Jobs and said, "Make me a VP," because he was the marketing leader on Lisa, which was a dismal failure. That was when Steve Jobs famously moved across the street, put up a pirate flag, and said, "We're going to do something amazingly great." Well, it sucks to be on the other side of the street. And so, Trips wondered what to do, and he knew Valentine. And Valentine said there's now 105 game companies in the U.S. alone, and there's 3 of them doing 10 million in revenue. We know because Sequoia looked at them and didn't invest in any of them because they're all Mickey Mouse. But if founders always need to pick the right time, and you're a year late, so you better get going. So, and at the time, so this is 1982. And in 1982, the Atari was the Atari VCS was strong. They sold about 35 million households, which there was a time when 10 million households seemed like an infinite number. And the U.S. cable companies each had about 30 million households, and they thought that was as big as anybody could get. And then on the computer games at the time sold in baggies and with mimeographed documentation in the U.S. And there was only really the computer game business was on the TRS-80, the Apple II, which had just had a floppy disk, and at the time it was 140K floppy disk. The PC Junior just came out, and but the PC Junior came out afterwards. It wasn't even out yet, so IBM was not in the business. The Sinclair Spectrum was big in the UK, so the early game designers or game makers wrote an assembler on these crappy little 8-bit machines. an 8-bit where the microprocessors were designed to be low cost controllers. Basically about about as powerful as what you'd have in today's washing machines. And so we came. So that's how we got started. And
so did you guys? Because you're both. I mean, you're not, neither of you guys are engineers, right? So how did you even come about hiring designers, engineers to build?
the EA was founded to be a publisher, and the idea was to work with programmers who worked from home.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. Okay.
And we called them software artists. And
Love it.
The launch ad for the company was, "Can a computer make you cry?" And we had 7 guys in a photo taken by a famous rock and roll photographer in sepia tone, all wearing black turtlenecks to look like nerdy Beatles. And there was a guy named Bill Budge who was kind of, I don't know, maybe the Ashton Kutcher of the time. He was kind of, the handsomest of any of them. And he'd done a game called Pinball Construction Set that he'd literally mimeographed the documentation, put it in baggies, sold about 50,000 copies, and it was no longer selling. So he was sitting around. So he was our first star. And, he's gone on to have a career, but he's walking down Union Street in San Francisco to the second floor studio where we're going to shoot this photo. And he's feeling embarrassed that, somebody's going to take his photo because he's just a nerd who put software on floppies and in baggies. And he's passing a head shop with San Francisco with hookahs and pot paraphernalia and everything but the drugs. And he saw this studded wrist bracelet sitting in the window, and he thought, And he walked in and he bought it. And he got to the photo shoot and said, "I don't know, should I wear this?" The guy's, "Absolutely." So that kind of became the hero shot. All these guys standing around, and he's holding this up, and your eyes riveted on that. So anyway, that was the launch, and there we found people who had built games at home. So Dan Button later transitioned, became Danny Button. Had a couple great early strategy games, and then some other games by high school kids were basically arcade ripoffs. There was one that looked like Axis Assassin and one that looked like Donkey Kong. And we, marketed them as if they were a new art form. And we were true believers. My daughter reminds me, she looks at us and says, "Dad, did you actually think these were good?" And I tell her that, every 6 years there's been a new console or a new device with 10x the polys and 10x the RAM. And for the first 2 years, we always think this time it's real.
Yeah.
And, after about 2 years, maybe in the third year, the players all see that the Wizard of Oz is, it's just a dude behind the curtains. But every 6 years, we have 2 years of believing we think we've really done it this time.
What would you say was maybe the hardest things in those first few years? Was it trying to find the right creators and talent? Is it distribution and getting awareness? Is it just trying to break through the noise?
Founders and creators, and they all overestimate their odds of success.
Right.
Yes.
Kind of like athletes in games. They all think they're going to win, and if they lose, it's just time ran out. And so, but we raised money in November '82 from Kleiner Perkins Sequoia, $2 million on $3 million pre.
Wow.
And a month later, Atari, which was the big dog at the time, announced they were going to miss their quarter. They shipped a game called E.T., and the guy who was running Atari was a Burlington Sox sales guy, knew nothing about tech, and they had told their engineers at the time, "We got E.T., just give me anything to put in a box and don't worry, it'll sell." And there's a movie about this. I think it sold 6 million copies and got returned 7 million, something like that. So that was a month after we raised money. And at that point, adults everywhere said, see, this is just a hula hoop. There's no future in this. And, and so we looked around, and it was a little like, the negative surprise of COVID, where the world changed all of a sudden. And at the time we were, the video games on Atari were selling 5-6 million copies, but computer games were struggling to sell 100,000 copies. We called that gold if we got 100,000 copies, which is $5 million consumer spend, $3 million net revenue. And we wrote in our business plan, one day video games are going to be bigger than music or movies, both of which looked like they were about 20 billion at the time. And people thought, well, that was crazy, which is my lesson to founders today, is that's the test of a vision, is when you can talk about what it'd be like in the present tense and everybody thinks you're crazy. Not like crazy, but stupid. Even better if they think you're stupid, because that means they're not going to try to copy you for a long time. So that was hard. The industry imploded a month later. The second thing that was hard is the first games we signed were all on the Atari 800, which had 4 controller outlets, so you could do 4-player games. It had grayscale, so you could get all kinds of visual information. And we launched games in May 82, and by about September 82, the Atari 800 was dying. And the Apple II was, we liked it, but Apple was trying as hard as they could to not be a home computer. And a couple of years later, this temporary CEO that Apple had named John Scully said there's no home computer market. So Apple, basically up until almost until the iPhone, was strongly negative about games. And so after launching Commodore, this little company in Philadelphia, was bringing out a cheaper game system with kind of a bad loading time, and everything was bad about it, but the price was good. So we had to do student body right and go back to all these developers working from home and get them to reprogram all their games. Luckily, the same 6502 processor, but reprogram all their games so that we could ship by Christmas. So first thing is the industry dies. The second thing is we're on the wrong platform, and that's all in the first year. And so the upshot of it was, I didn't know it at the time, but most startups miss their first year revenue plan by kind of half, and that's still good. And we missed by half, but by missing by half, not only was there nobody who wanted to invest in us, but we run out of cash. So we then had, over the next couple of years, we made a couple of missteps. One misstep was half of the execs at EA had come not out of games, had come out of business. And after we missed revenue by half, they said, we have an idea. Let's do productivity software. And,
well, I was going to ask if you guys tried to pivot because the games industry was dying.
Here's another lesson for founders: is stick to your knitting. And at the time, they said, literally, there was a guy from Xerox PARC, another guy from VisiCorp that did the spreadsheet prior to Excel. And they said, we know the people at these other companies. We're as smart as them. We're as smart as those people at Microsoft. They're making software. We should make productivity software. And so, we wasted time and energy, bought a integrated spreadsheet mailer program for 15% of the company, and all that was stillborn. And so the industry dies, the platforms change, then the self-inflicted wound of not sticking. There's another lesson for founders: is be real clear about your vision and mission. So the vision is, one day games are going to be bigger than movies or music. And the mission was make great games. And the mission statement that EA wrote that kind of equivocated, and it was, make software that makes a home computer worth owning, which means, you can go do productivity software and stuff like that. And the founding ad, Can a Computer Make You Cry, was all about games as an entertainment medium. And so we found that the people who joined the company on that mission, want to make great games, stayed forever. And the people who came because they wanted to make computer work going, they wanted to have a career, they wanted to make money, they wanted to work in tech, they all left as soon as everything got hard. So
Yeah.
kind of another
Mercenaries. Yeah.
lesson
Not the
is
same.
build a company that's mission driven, be really clear about the mission, and find people aligned to the mission. You can see that in medicine. Worked with a company called Livongo that did that around diabetes. Certainly do it in education. Been working with Duolingo a long time. They're so mission driven about education that the first 100 employees all came to teach 1 billion people a language they needed to get in the middle class for free. And when I proposed monetizing with a subscription, there was an internal revolt. So Louis Van Ahn spent 2 years trying to convince employees. And in the end, he said, look, some people who are rich enough will pay us a little bit so that we can afford to do this for all the people who can't. So don't worry. But he made a vow, we'll never make you pay to learn better. So, you can pay for getting compliments and streaks, all that stuff, but we're not gonna give you a bad teacher just because you don't pass. So, then the ASO almost out of cash, and then what often happens, and I've seen this again, founder stories, is the founder that can get you from 0 to 50 million has trouble getting you from 50 to 500. You have to start becoming a leader of leaders and then managing leader of leaders. And so sometimes it was just self-inflicted wounds from the founder who's great from 0 to 50, doesn't scale very well. And I've since learned that can happen at about 150 employees. It can happen at 500 employees, and it can happen at about 1,500 to 2,000 employees. Those are break points. And the founders who aren't on a mission of learning and self-skill development tend to kill their companies at each of those breakpoints. So then with EA, and probably the next big thing that happened is consoles came back. So the overnight success of Nintendo in the U.S. was not. When Nintendo in 1986 decided to come to the U.S. because they were already a big hit in Japan, no U.S. retailer would carry the NES. They said, well, that's dumb. Everybody knows that video games were a fad. It died with Atari. It's never coming back. And so Nintendo went to Toys R Us, which had a 20% market share in toys and games at the time, said, we'll give you 100,000 unit on spec. If they sell, you can pay us a couple months after they sell. It's free to you. Just put in the shelf space. We'll ship it to you and everything. And Toys R Us went, okay, well, we'll give us some ad money. We'll do it just in New York City. They sold 100,000 units in New York City. They vaporized. And the ad for the original Nintendo, it featured not Mario, not Zelda, but a robot arm. Because even a robot arm, and then they had Duck Hunt with a crappy little fake gun. And so even they didn't totally believe it was going to work in the States. But so that was 86. Starting in 87, the video game business started working in the U.S. And EA kind of had its head in the sand. Always said, consoles are a step back in technology. Floppy disk, we got offline storage. We can update it. We've got better processors. These are a step back. We're a tech company. We're not going backwards. Well, there's a guy at EA named Don Traeger who was kind of an action fan. He had worked at Atari. He was the voice in Paperboy, the arcade game, and the coin-op game. And he came in one day and said, oh, you got to look at this. This is taking off. We're in the wrong place. And EA licensed 2 games at the time to Konami, so we're not getting that. The CEO didn't want to get in that business.
Interesting.
And at the time, I spent time going around to see all of our retailers. So I'm with a guy named John Sullivan, who was the buyer for Toys R Us, which had a 22% market share at the time. And those guys liked me, so they would show me, especially him and Gary Cusin of Babbage's. They would let me come into the office and sit and look at all their inventory printout. And what that would be at the time, it'd be one of the computer paper that had holes on the left side on a 3-year binder, and each SKU would have units sold this week, unit on hand, average sales price, gross margin, and any kind of back order. So they'd look at that, and every week they'd place new orders, and they were all limited on what's called open to buy. So they every buyer had a total asset amount that could be what's in inventory on the shelves in the warehouse and what's on order. So what's committed. And so I'm in there, and this time I go to see him in New Jersey, and he's a redheaded, pretty energetic guy. And at the time, he was the big swinging dog in video game retail. And he goes, "Bing, I'm going to show you something." He opens his up and says, "See all these sales?" He goes, "Telephone numbers, telephone numbers, telephone numbers." Well, telephone numbers kind of 10 figures. And and here are all these things that we sold 100,000 of this, 200,000 of this, 300,000 of this. He says millions, and then he turns the page and goes telephone numbers, telephone numbers. He turns the page and goes telephone numbers. He goes, "Here's your best selling game. That's a zip code, 5 digits." And he says, "You ought to be in the telephone number business, and you're in the zip code business." So I go back there going, "Hey, you guys, we got to get ahead of the sand. We're missing this. Traeger was right." And still, it took a little while to convince any of the others at EA that this could happen. And then Nintendo was kind of it was the first game company that got in monopoly trouble with the feds. So Nintendo's deal at the time was, you make the game, you give us $20,000 for a development system, you build the game. After you finish the game, you send it to us, and within about 8 weeks, we'll tell you whether we'll manufacture it and how many units we'll manufacture. And when we tell you that number, you wire us half the money for whatever it was, like $10 per unit for all the units that we're going to get. And then kind of 3 weeks later, we have them manufactured. We put them on our loading dock in Kyoto, and it sits on the loading dock until you wire us the second half of the money.
Wow.
So it was amazing.
They had all the power.
Yeah.
It was amazingly
everybody.
terrible. And all that was legal. That was kind of as legal as the Apple App Store. You know that they could be doing slimy stuff in it. But then Sega decided to come to the US, Sega Mega Drive Genesis, and Nintendo sent not exactly a cease and desist, but threatening letters to every one of the retailers that basically said, we're going to sue Sega. They're doing this. They're doing this. You could get pulled into it. So basically the answer to the retailers was, oh, crap. They're not saying as much, but if I carry Sega, they're going to cut me off. And
Got that Yakuza background, right?
At that point, the U.S. Justice Department got involved and kind of backed off. So that allowed Sega to get distribution. And then EA at the time, I was negotiating with Sega and I said, we need a better deal. And they said, no, we're as good as Nintendo. You sucked to Nintendo for so long. I said, we've only done 2 games on the NES. We can't do business that way. And so we negotiated for a while. And then a guy named Jim Nichols, along with Steve Hayes, we did a clean room trying to reverse engineer the Genesis.
Yeah.
And one weekend, you can't trial and error this. So in a clean room, what he can do, he can go in and actually write to the metal And then he's got to build a development system on top of it and give the development system to other programmers who never see his original work. So his original take apart work is in a clean room that was kind of legally protected by a guy named Gordy Davidson at Fenwick and West. And so one weekend he goes, I don't know, maybe they just copied the architecture of the 3DO. Of the Commodore Amiga. He said maybe it's like a Commodore Amiga with a processor and a coprocessor. And he said if they did that, remember, here's how the Amiga, here's their memory architecture, here's where they put this. And he tried it and he just wrote to those memory locations and it worked. So
Wow.
that's how EA got into the Genesis business. And
What was that, the big break, or was that
that was because we had about a 10 share on computer games for a few years, but then we look up and go, oh my gosh, computer games now after Nintendo launch have like a 10 share of the whole game business. So instead of having a 10 market share, we had a 1 market share. So the Sega Genesis, where we did the EA Sports and started out at EASN, that was kind of the first time the company had a tailwind.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to understand how you all survived through what you were saying was like you were running out of cash and you guys were pivoting into productivity, and like what is it just the console business came back and you were kind of there long enough?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
because
you gotta survive to thrive.
We helped make the Genesis successful, but the Genesis success, all it did is kind of match the Super Nintendo.
How big was the company?
They both did about 35 million units.
Oh, wow. Okay. And like how many people was the company when you were sort of running out of cash at that point?
Let's see, we went public in 89 at, I think it was at 80 million market cap, on 72 million revenue. And with no bad results, the stock fell by a third 6 weeks after the IPO. And hundreds.
Yeah.
Okay, you're already pretty sizable then at that point.
Not thousands.
Right.
Yeah, because we were doing, so you think about it, $80 million.
Yeah.
We were paying out kind of 15% in royalties. So we probably had OPEX of people on the order of 30%, 25 million divided by, 200,000. It's kind of 100, 150 people, something like that.
Yeah.
But like, I guess maybe is like, because you said, was it 82 you started, right? And then 86.
Yeah, 82 when we launched, it was like 11 people.
Uh-huh.
By 89, we had probably another 15 people in the UK.
Okay.
We found a game there called Populous, company Bullfrog, Peter Molyneux. He started Bullfrog.
Yeah.
He did Fable and other. And one of his claims to fame that he won't brag about is Demis Hassabis was his lead programmer on about his fourth with the A called Theme Park.
So then did you guys end up having to raise more capital, or you were able to
We did
grow through revenue?
We raised that first 2, and then we raised another 3 right on the eve of launching first games, kind of on hope with his story. And so now we had 5 in capital, and now it's our business plan was to IPO in 87. And then we made a bunch of terrible deals in the UK that it almost sunk the company. So the company did not IPO in 87 and instead got a bridge loan for, I think, about $5 million from Alex Brown. And I probably had some rights in it. And that kept us going then for a couple of years. But yeah, it was, the Don Valentine's most telling remark. He would usually sit and scowl in board meetings the whole time, just scowl. And Brooke Byers of Kleiner Perkins on the board, and he would say positive things the whole time. And I think the 2 venture firms carried on those cultures.
Right.
For
I feel like I've
40
heard that
years
before
later.
about Don Valentine. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, Valentine, surprisingly, when he got rich, he was an art collector. He was an elfish-like drunk. He'd have a few drinks at a nonprofit thing. He'd walk around with a grin, and he'd seem shorter than he was. But he grew up in the semiconductor business. It was dog eat dog. So in business, he was scowling the whole time. And we're in one board meeting just before this, Alex Brown, and you have to remind MBAs especially, but founders as well, that cash is king. And about 45 minutes into the boardroom, he's getting this storm cloud around his head, and he still hasn't said a thing. And finally, well, Don, what are you thinking? Because he's got a notebook and he's just got his pen and he's circling something, and he goes, Don, what are you writing? It's like 45 days cash. It's like, oh. So we did, luckily found someone willing to give us cash, but we actually tried at the time with our second bad head of sales, a thing called It's a Blitz, where every employee called every retailer. Everybody got a certain number of retailers and called retailers to try to get them to buy a few more EA games at the time. And that was, kind of 87-ish. And that was another disaster. So it's great to have employees do customer service calls, but not to actually try to sell stuff to professionals.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about a lot of the mistakes that you made. Obviously, you guys did something right to survive until you did. And it was like about 8 years until you IPO'd. I mean, that's obviously you guys made it.
Interestingly enough, after we IPO'd a couple of years later, Stanford Business School made us the entrepreneurial company of the year. In 7 years to get to $70 million in revenue was lightning fast at the time.
Right.
And off of only 10 million.
I'm a big believer in OKRs and goal setting. And so the EA business plan every year had some top goals. And I looked at it, and I like to tell founders and students this: of the top 3 goals for the first 10 years on the way to becoming Entrepreneurial Company of the Year, we always hit 1, we never hit 3. And we hit, in 10 years, exactly 15 out of the 30. So, the top goal in 1987 was go public. And that didn't work. So that would be a no. And then, another would be launch a Sega Genesis product line successfully, and that was a yes. And along the way, some of it is, you just keep shucking and jiving and moving fast. We made a really early bet on selling direct to retailers instead of through a distribution, and that created more overhead and more friction. And you had to be closer to the metal because there was no intermediate place to stash inventory. And the way the retailers work with vendors is they pay you for the next order. You think they're paying you for the last order, but they think they're paying you for the next order. As far as they're concerned, the last order you send, they don't own. They're renting you the space. And if it doesn't sell, you can come get it if you want, but they ain't paying you. So let's see, along the way, there was a couple bad hires who, made self-inflicted wound mistakes. And what do we do well at the time? We did really good marketing. And, we tried various stuff. We always believed in branding. And then we also believed in development tools. So we built proprietary development tools for the third-party developers. And we didn't really start doing internal development for the first 7 years, and ended up doing it basically as soon as we realized SQL is going to work. You had to do, you couldn't count on external teams to do sequels. Surprisingly enough, after we did Madden football the first time, the retailers said, "Yeah, that was good. We can keep selling this." We said, "Well, we want to do another one," and they said, "No, it won't sell. Don't. If you do Madden football 2, we're going to send Madden Football 1 back, and we're not going to buy the new one. So we're going to put you out of business. Don't you dare. So anybody who says now, wow, how uncreative doing sports sequels every year, I go, yeah, well, we had to overcome a lot of negativism. And I guess that's part of being creative when everybody says, if you do that, I'm going to put you out of business. And then 40 years later, they go, give me next year's, please.
I'm curious, what is the story behind Madden?
It's kind of long and winding, but I think with Don Valentine, knew someone who knew someone. So Madden's agent at IMG was named Sandy Montag, and they're in the business of getting licensing work. And so somehow or another it was, well, maybe I can make you a little money on this instead of T-shirts. And Madden at the time had, he was the Ace Hardware spokesperson, but he wasn't, he was out of coaching and not yet doing TV. He was actually doing a coaching class, I think at Contra Costa College. And so he had a little bit of stuff. So the guy, Sandy Montag, connected us and we were believers. And Trip got into the game business because in high school, he did a Dyson card football game, trying to copy Stratomatic, and none of them was sold. So he's kind of trying to make good for wasting his dad's money and prove to his dad that he wasn't a schmuck. So Trip was always looking for football. When he heard about that, we signed Madden. Well, then got a developer who had a little game, a feature. There wasn't a whole game yet on Apple II. So we started on Apple II, and the original Madden game had Play Creator as well as being a simulation. And I think the original deal with Madden was for 2 years, a guarantee in 2 years. The game hadn't shipped in 2 years. And the reason was the game we went for his approval was 7-on-7. And that was all the Apple II could animate. And he said, I can't put my name on that. So then after that, we've got the decision, should we re-up with another set of guarantees or not? And we believed it. The reason we believed in Madden is because we had done a game called Dr. J and Larry Bird 1-on-1. And the boys that did that game, a couple of high school kids from San Diego, they were so in love with Julius Erving, they didn't want to disappoint him. So they worked longer and harder than they needed to. So I think it was something like 7 passes on the animation. And there was a couple of famous ones, but one was Julius Erving did a finger roll, which is set up for the slam dunk. He'd go up for the layup and hold his hand like this and let the ball roll off it. The Apple II and the Commodore 64 could not actually show fingers, let alone articulated fingers for a finger roll. But so the animator kept working to make the gamer see the finger roll, even though all you saw was a limb and then the ball coming off. So worked on it. And then, also, if you hung on the rim, you could shatter the backboard, which used to happen in the NBA. It's kind of like fighting with blood used to happen in the NHL, and backboards used to shatter in the NBA. So it made that seem just perfect, kind of the way the loot pinata happened in Diablo. You work on it, to get it just right. So we saw these guys work to Dr. J to get it just right and made it really high quality. And we thought that we would all work harder to live up to what we thought of a Madden, even though people playing football games at the time had never heard of Madden. So that was a case of the license not for marketing, but actually it was negative marketing at the time, but because we thought we'd get higher quality. So, we found over the years that it's kind of the Steve Jobs lesson. Going from good to great to amazingly great pays huge dividends.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty painful at the time, especially if you take the time and energy to try to go from great to amazingly great and don't get there. We had some really good people. So there was a guy named Ned Lerner did a game called Chuck Yeager. And we figured out how to get that to sell, even though nobody wanted a competitor to Microsoft Flight Simulator at the time. Another kid at a Apple computer fair had a little flight simulator with kind of a blitter in it that made it look like on the Z-axis it was going faster than the Apple II knew how to do. And he was all excited about it, showed his feature fragment to Steve Wozniak, who introduced it to EA. And then a guy named Steve Hayes, who came out of Xerox PARC, basically made the game work, turned it from a fragment into a game, and that was another number one. So, but
Any
at the
learnings
time,
from the hiring?
Pardon?
Any learnings from like the hiring in terms of like what made you all be able to hire and bring in good people?
Mission. You know, hired real well. A guy named Tim Mott, who came out of Xerox PARC, was the first CTO, and he hired his two favorite guys at Xerox PARC, who were building a little game on the side. Interesting enough, one of the guys named Dave Maynard, his son is a co-founder of Manticore. And has done a couple of games along the way. So, you know, and then hired some not so great people as well. So yeah, I went through two bad sales leaders before landing on Larry Probst, who actually was extraordinarily competent. And then the original people that got brought in as what were called producers at the time, they were marketing people out of Apple, and they didn't like the game business, and they both blew out. And then there was another guy who didn't have all the charisma but knew games pretty deeply, named Joey Barra, and he ended up being a hit maker. But so many people showed up because they believed in this mission that games could be an art form and be really big. And then the company, you know, got a little momentum and a little public persona. Even doing things that didn't work, like betting on the Amiga. Again, it felt very mission driven.
Maybe we could transition to your time as an investor. So at some point, EA IPOs, and another kind of just interesting fact with you and Mitch Lasky, you know, being in the games business and then turning in to become really well known and successful investors. Like, I guess, what was your thinking about why you decided to make that change?
Let's see, along the way, I invented a title called Chief Creative Officer in the 90s. And at that point, I was kind of responsible for the most important 10 games working. And, you know, so I learned about game design from the customer experience out. You know, I started out with, what do I have to say about a game to make the marketing work? And then where do the features come from? And when the designers are doing it, what's under it? So I kind of reverse engineered from marketing to data structures and user interface. And so along the way, I held the first endowed chair in any university in game design at USC Film School, kind of in the early 2000s. So I'm starting to see what kids are into, and then helped start EA's summer intern program. And actually, Brooke Byers of Kleiner, his two sons, it was their first job, and they both become pretty noted investors, Blake Byers and Chad Byers.
Yeah.
So, you know, I saw youth. I believed in youth. And in 07, in two back-to-back weeks, I was on stage for WWCD, Apple's developer conference, and Apple had just started putting games in the Apple Store, and they didn't like it much, but you know, they convinced Steve to let somebody talk about games at WWDC. So I was the shill. And then 2 weeks later, Facebook had its first, I think it was called F8, even back then. And so I went back to EA and said, I've seen the future. The future is digital distribution, not physical distribution in stores. The future is going to be digital platforms, as opposed to these operating systems locked into silicon, locked into plastic. And the future is going to be freemium, and it's going to be social, and it's going to be instrumented, because everybody's going to. And I got told, you're wrong on all four. There's no way any of this is going to work. And so at the time I got EA, I started within EA in my chief creative officer lab. We started doing a direct pay product. We did a couple of games on Facebook, and I was thinking freemium is one vector, social is another vector, user pay is another vector. I'd gotten us with Club Pogo to actually prove that users would subscribe, and then they would do what we called IFP later on afterwards. And then I knew about what was going on with Cartwriter and kind of freemium in Asia, because up until then, Asia for the console business was a $0 billion business. From the West, it looked like once you got outside of Japan, intellectual property was deemed to be necessarily free. And so starting in the internet cafes in Korea, we started seeing free to play, but you got to be connected to a server, and then you can buy stuff through the server as this new model. And we'd done a little bit of that. The first freemium product he did was Club Pogo in the early 2000s, which was a casual game site that real gamers ignored. And so in 07, I thought, okay, this is what's working in Asia. What works on Club Pogo is coming to the US, and it's going to happen. And I thought at the time it's going to happen on Facebook, on iOS, and on Google. I thought Google had a developer platform at the time, and I thought Google obviously is going to be able to do this as well. I didn't see Android. Android came later, and but and then within EA, this is a problem of being around a while. People go, no, video game business has always been packaged goods business. Well, actually, when we started, it wasn't really a packaged goods business. It was a baggy business. There were no chains. And EA's first shipment was to one of the first game chains called Babbage's that emerged and all that, and eventually became GameStop. And they had, no, this distribution that we've seen and this development that we've seen is temporary, and something new is going to happen. So out of frustration, and also I believe that I like organizations where young people can progress lickety split, and not being, once you see an organization where the boss is always older than the subordinate, and their boss is always older than them. My father grew up in a company like that, and it drove him crazy, where when the CEO retires, everybody moves up exactly one notch. And so EA was becoming that, and it was getting stuck in this distribution strategy. And so I thought, okay, I want to go someplace where young people can progress as fast as they want. And I think the future in games will be different than this. And meanwhile, I've been on the Amazon board for a while, and I saw the power of subscription with Prime. And but even at the time at EA, I said, e-commerce is going to be big. I said, how big? And the people in the packaging business at the time thought that in 10 years, e-commerce was going to be no more than 5% of Western commerce. So, and the interesting thing about venture is it's always take advantage of the incumbents who want to make their quarter and protect their current business, and then work your ass off and understand new technology and build a business that eventually they can buy, or you can put them out of business. And so that was kind of when we started EA, we weren't really trying to. There wasn't an incumbent we thought was doing it wrong.
Okay.
We didn't imagine Atari was going to crater, and then when it cratered, it seemed kind of self-inflicted. But by 2007, I thought the packaged goods game business was just about to run its course. And but also, even within EA, I wanted to do. I went around in EA to figure out who were the people who had gotten promoted rapidly before they were 30. And I wanted to do a program of 30 by 30. Who were the 30 people in the company who were kind of heads of product or heads of engineering on a product. We had about 25 games at a time, and each of them had about 5 leaders. So, those 125 people plus some corporate people, we find 30 people who by age 29 were doing one of those. And so I've identified a few people, and then I went back and asked all their bosses along the way, how come they got promoted? And the answer was the bosses couldn't remember. And so somehow other people just gotten there. So it was I don't know. I've just always believed that the fearlessness and fresh thinking of young people, that contrariness, can be pretty powerful. A guy named Jeff Cortnell, who was a lifetime NHL hockey player, he said, it's interesting to win the Stanley Cup. You got to have all 3 age groups work. You got to have the old vets play as if they're a little younger. You have to have the mid-career people deliver, and you got to have the young people be really exciting. The old people get excited by the young people. The young people see the meaning of the old people, and you got to have all 3 age cohorts working. And so we started looking at game teams where all the decisions are being made by 38-year-olds, and the 25-year-olds are told to stay in line. I thought that was usually the formula for temporary success at best. And I'd known Kleiner for a long time because, I'd known Brooke Byers since '82. And what actually happened, this is kind of the power of lateral thinking. I always thought I was going to work full time till we had an empty nest, and then I couldn't imagine. And we dropped off our older daughter at college and walked into our flat in San Francisco, walked through the front door, and I thought, it feels empty without her here. Now we're Miss one kid, and I went, oh, Kleiner Perkins. And I went, what? Where'd that come from? And okay, well, I love Kleiner Perkins. I've been doing a little stuff with them on the side. Money is a fitness function. They're happy to find 24-year-old founders as well as 35-year-old founders. So it's true meritocracy. And I thought that, that would be a place to go try to chase this new vision of the digital platform. And at the time, I thought e-commerce with social and gamification. I was always a fanboy for the reinvention of education. I like the joke that the video game business was created by high potential kids who are bored with lecture class. We'd sit in the lecture hall, and all we really wanted to do was move our hands a little bit and make the professor bounce around. But other than that, you didn't want to sit and take notes. And so and I'd been on school boards with my kids and stuff in the early 2000s. I had this notion of zero marginal cost education delivered digitally, which, now we look around and Coursera is kind of doing that. Duolingo's doing that. Newzella's doing that. So I went to Kleiner and said, games, education, and e-commerce. I want to focus on those.
That's exciting. Wow.
And then started and right away brought in 2 game companies, and then proceeded to be at Kleiner and then on the Amazon board for another bunch of years.
I love to understand you've worked with some incredible founders. companies you back, you mentioned Duolingo already, Zhang, Spotify, and that game company. We interviewed Genova actually the other week. What would
And
you say kind
Genova
of
was
really?
my star student at USC.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we got
Look
cut
at
off
that.
short. We went an hour and 20 minutes and still hadn't even really
Yeah,
covered
yeah,
anything. So we're like, we have to do another
yeah,
follow up. Yeah.
yeah. Part two coming. What would you say sets those kind of superstar, like truly exceptional founders apart from just the, good ones? And Adventure is always looking for that.
It's a little bit like scouts trying to pick number one draft picks for sports. They get a lot of them wrong. And my sense is for quarterbacks anyway in the NFL, it's kind of this forever motivated. And sometimes there's kids who've had life too easy and they don't stay motivated. They settle for glory days success instead of so I think Tom Brady being kind of looking like nobody wanted him out of high school going into college. He just got a chip on his shoulder forever, and he kind of figured out how to take control. So that you look at them, are they going to be forever motivated? I think another thing is are they committed to constant learning? Can they tell a story, which is important for press and recruiting? And you can, in the investor pitch, you can get a sense of how good a storyteller they are. It's a little hard to get a sense of pace, but commitment to pace matters. And in a pitch, the most thing, what I tell founders is don't waste your first slide, and they all do. If your first slide in the pitch deck is the name of the company, you're already letting investors know that you're willing to waste time. And I also tell them that all investors pay attention to two slides. The first slide, because they're in the room waiting for you to start, and then the income statement, and all their slide attentiveness is random. So make sure those two slides are great. It's a little like, your income statement for an investor is like your transcript for college admission. They all, they start with that. And your whole pitch deck should basically explain your income statement. Let's see, other than that, how to predict. I think the hit rate of trying to predict is pretty poor. I know some people who want to find founders who don't want help. Others want to find founders who are learning machines. It's useful if they've just done something that got them 2/3 of the way to their next business.
Yeah, it's like getting a bit of a head start.
We've seen, Reid Hoffman calls blitz scaling, but you do have to have kind of a commitment to scaling. And then there's, the Aspergery founders who are just plain brilliant and, stick at it for a while. And, people like that who don't really seem like extroverted salespeople who go to a flea market with, a rusty old hat and come back with a Mercedes. But they can just plain make better stuff.
Yeah.
And, Roblox is one of those make better stuff. And it started out looking like a whole dumb idea. Like Tim Sweeney is a make better stuff who for a long time was in the shadow of his business partner. But it's, so usually what you do is you try to find somebody who can get you to 100 million in revenue. And then, maybe they're the temporary founder. Maybe they keep growing. I haven't seen anybody who can predict with a whole lot of likelihood to win who's gonna continue to scale after that. People, because even people like Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos got voted against. There was a time everybody said, "Well, those guys are done." Louis Vuitton There was a time when people were, well, that guy's missed revenue plan 2 years in a row. He's probably not going to be able to keep going.
Yeah.
Again, Tom Brady couldn't get recruited into college. And so some people would go, that guy has no future. So I'd say motivation, learning skills, storytelling. I think the ability to live a mission matters a lot. And then speed, kind of a need for speed. And, who do we get fooled by?
Call them out.
Yeah. In general, I was a scholarship kid, but I went to school with trust funders, and you really don't want your kids to be trust funders, and you want them to continue to have to earn their own success. So
Yeah.
you want founders who aren't afraid of kind of living close to the metal.
I like that.
Even kind of the Y Combinator class. About all you can do at the seed level is predict that if the company fails, if someone will do an acquire because I want to get that founder because the founder looks like they'd be good talent. By the time you get to Series B, you're mostly betting on the numbers, and customer diligence matters a lot. The Series A, where you're getting kind of the story and the people and bigger numbers. I think I've been in a lot of meetings trying to break down, what's the checklist that makes a good founder. And people have anecdotes, but I do like to, for founders, CEOs, give them kind of a skill-based scorecard along the way. And the number one job of the founder is always product market fit. And surprisingly enough, people use the term product market fit a lot, but there's very few people who have a computer falsifiable definition of it. And so, now the question is, you're going to bet, is this person on their own and with the team they put together going to be able to get product market fit and keep growing it?
Maybe, we're getting to the end of the interview. Maybe we can go back and, you have such long history and experience in games. Obviously, the industry, it's going through a challenging moment, much as ones you've faced prior. I'm curious maybe what keeps you excited about the game industry now, or what do you see as the most kind of exciting thing coming around the corner?
I like games broadly, gamification. And, many people have gotten meaning out of life from religion, others from kind of tribal cultural values. And for me, I'd say the storytelling and the game mechanics and kind of the winning and the success in games I've always found to be very satisfying. So my sense is that games, broadly speaking, are going to continue to grow in importance for meaning creation. Games end up giving you something to do every day, something to do with friends, some way to get achievements. Often achievements kind of that without raw materials required, expensive raw materials required. But I think games are the second best human invention for generating motivation after religion, and games cause fewer wars. And so I think, education, employment, fitness, medicine, kind of all the human improvement stuff, all benefit from the kind of things we do with games. And it's partly because so much of, probably 2/3 of games just come out of human psychology and communication theory. And the other thing the games do that is not in the kind of the raw material of human psychology is create constraints of time or field, and so it does and constraints usually can be used to make kind of more interesting models. I think games. I find most movies pretty boring now. Like games to me is way more interesting. And if you ever played a game like Civilization or even Tetris, where you go one more turn and next thing you know the birds are chirping out the window. When I was a kid, that was it. I did that with books. Books was the all nighter of the past, and so I like the entertainment quality plus the meaning generation, and then the zenness. I'm not a meditator, but it sure feels to me when I'm off doing a solo thing, I'm meditating. When I'm off doing right before this, I was on a Alderman raid with a pickup group in World of Warcraft, and that's stressful fun with an achievement along the way, and people playing roles. One person is calling the strategy shots, and somebody else is kibitzing a little bit, and then I was a tank, and somebody else a healer. So everybody kind of has roles, and you stop right before the boss, and you talk through what everybody's going to do, and hope nobody pulls a Leroy Jenkins.
Yeah.
So I kind of think the kind of a little discussed fact that I think that on average, the server connected people read more words now than ever, certainly watch more video now than ever. And I think use game mechanics more often now than ever. And so as a business person, I think the designer's job is to create minutes, and the business person's job is to create money per minutes. And so the money per minutes in the game business stalled a little bit as distribution got screwed up. And because of that, like the movie business, the power players in the game business stopped being innovative. And usually that's an opportunity for somebody, and often the people for whom it's an opportunity are the young people who the old people don't want to bet on.
That's great. Maybe we can transition to the lightning round, which is just ask some quick questions and hear some responses. So, what's something you've consumed recently that you like? Could be media or anything.
Let's see. I'm always reading books. My favorite author is Robert Parker, who writes a series called Spencer. I just finished one of those. I'm a Audible fan. I was a founding board member of Audible, and we just finished the Taylor Swift book by Rob Sheffield, and now we're doing an autobiography about Cher. And that's kind of interesting. And then on my own, I'm doing Oscar Wars about all the politicking to try to get Oscars a decade at a time. I find that to be interesting.
What about a favorite game right now?
Well, I'm back to playing WoW when two of my guildmates from '07 started playing again with Dragonflight. And I just think that there's a lot of lifelong lessons learnable in WoW. I've been playing a 2K game called NFL Playmakers that I like a lot, that combined battle cards with Fantasy League. It's really, usually with sports games, I go really, really deep for 1 year. And we'll see if this keeps it going next year, because the Fantasy League part ends next week. I'm playing that. I've been playing, my Duolingo streak is 1,600 or something like that.
Wow.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
Are you still on the board?
1665 on Duolingo.
Jeez, that's crazy.
Then I usually have a snackable game. I'm playing the New York Times games. Jonathan Knight, who runs it, he was at EA and then at Zynga. I knew him forever. And I didn't like Wordle that much. I kind of like the spelling bee thing, whatever that is. Had done that separately, but the fact they're all there and all digital, I like a lot. And surprisingly, the crossword puzzles that I used to do on paper a million years ago are the least interesting part of it to me. And then I usually play one or two other little things. I'm playing a game called Polytopia, which is really poor man's Civilization that you could finish beginning to end in about 25 minutes. I played some Match Factory. I usually have a couple games that are in development, playing at a time, and then after launch, they need a little extra.
You're all over the place. That's that's amazing. That's a very diverse set of games. I'm like the competitive archetype, so like all my games are like competitive. You're like,
Yeah,
you got New York Times, you got WoW.
many people age out on that, but the thing is, if you do it with a group of friends, your hand-eye coordination is all going to scale about equally.
Yeah, we're all downtrending like constantly forever. So,
but I stopped having a console. I'd say my favorite video game system has always been a PC laptop. I like the mouse.
Yeah.
And we went to a place where, anyway, so every time I get a console anymore, I give it away to younger friends. And, I'm kind of a 8 to 10 hour a day screen time person, according to Apple. We'll keep doing that.
Well, yeah.
But I never thought, I'd read on a phone, play games on a phone. It is the cloud computing.
What about, is there a dream IP that you would love to work with?
I'd say, Sims, Lord of the Rings. I do like the NFL a lot, but I think sooner or later somebody's going to do a better NFL game.
Oh yeah, I guess you already did the NFL on The Sims.
That's true. It's the other IP. There's not really any book. Oh, I do like Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. Have you guys read that?
That's great. Yes, of course.
I read that twice. I think that would be kind of fun, but it's I don't like. I never like a series where a hero dies, and I really like world games. So the question is, what's a world that I'd want to inhabit? And I think, other than Tolkien and maybe WoW, I think I'd rather create it from scratch.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And I just saw a new musical in London called Stalled. I like that. And I'm kind of thinking that I was just in Paris to see an AI healthcare company I'm on the board of, and walking the streets of Paris is kind of like a product I'd highly recommend.
Yeah. I like that.
But I took the Channel train from Paris to London. Don't recommend that. I thought it was going to be more of a thing, and it wasn't. It's like Amtrak. And when you go into the tunnel under the English Channel, I kind of thought that in the train car there were going to be, some LCD screen would come up and it'd show you, the Spanish Armada trying to cross the English Channel way back when, and it's just nothing. It's just, black.
Just a regular train ride.
You go to Asia for that.
I do think. I'm a fan of Neil Stephenson, and I was hoping that Lamina was going to do more of a snow crash like story, and he's less interested in Snow Crash as a New World. Authors tend to like a single storyline, and I tend to like worlds. I like to say that gamers always open closed doors, and so a world where there's something fascinating over on the edge of the horizon. You go there, and there's always another horizon to go to.
What's a productivity hack?
I call it calendar Kaizen, and that is to instrument your calendar and try to figure out how to improve it. What I found is people who are achievers often don't have useful medium-term goals. And so the best medium-term goal is more great days per month. And I'm a fan of measuring a week every now and then by the quality of the hours, basically to break it down by hour. And for constant improvement. What Bezos always said was the key to constant improvement is accurate measurement. measure your days by the hour. Both Vinod Khosla and John Doerr, when they became successful, their hack was be home for dinner with their kids 70% of the evenings per month. So one way or another, it's use the calendar as your boss, but then also KPI your calendar, instrument your calendar.
I love that. What about the opposite? What's your favorite way to relax?
Well, I still like gaming to relax, gaming and books, but the only thing that I can imagine retiring for would be to go boogie boarding. I like that, living out in the waves, and especially with another friend or two. When my daughters are out in the waves with me, that's a blast. I've got some Argentinian friends. When they're out in the waves, that's a blast. So you can chit chat a little bit out in the waves, but every wave that comes in is different. And like many things, you're not perfect every time. It's kind of the fascination people have with golf is every now and then you hit a perfect shot and you try to recapitulate that and just can't, or a perfect ski turn, or a perfect podcast interview. It's like, oh, that was so good. How do we get more of those?
Yeah.
Magic. Biggest lesson from a mentor?
There's a guy named Alan Mooney who died young, but he was the head of business at a agency called Ogilvy and Mather. And he's, at the time, ad agencies, the account exec would write these strategy docs that would be taught in business school. And he said, if you want to excite your creative people, never give them something analytical, immerse them in the fantasy. And he said, when he was my age at the time, when he had been that age, he said early in his career, he was assigned to Schweppes bitter lemon.
Mm-hmm.
And that had that whole campaign with like this English colonel guy and all that. And he said he wrote for the creative people, instead of a brief, he wrote a short story about English couples sitting in the backyard in autumn in New York in a brownstone with the sun coming through the dappled leaves. Perfect for this drink. And then what they were talking about, enjoying the day. And so his notion is set up your creative people with useful kind of lateral thinking. And I learned that from David Kelly, the founder of IDEO. And, he said, he says, if you want to brainstorm, always get people to bring in stuff to play with their hands while they're thinking.
And then maybe to end, our cornerstone question, we always ask, if you can go back to the founding of EA, what's one piece of advice you would give to yourself?
Let's see. So what I found is most of my catastrophes in my first 10 years were not following my own playbook, taking shortcuts. I got this. And in the last 20 years, most of my catastrophes are when I was right, but I couldn't convince other people. I think that's my own shortfall when I'm right, and it's somehow or another the way I communicate. I think teachers find out that they have to figure out how to teach something in a way that each learner can hear. But back then, I'd say I wish I would have created more artifacts. Basically a journal. Now people can do it with photos. And so you can go back and see what actually happened, because we tend to bend our past, and you forget about those moments when you didn't really know what was going to happen next, when you're making hard decisions. So I'd say, when I tell kids in their 20s, it's, try to overachieve in everything you do, make great friends and share everything with them, and create artifacts. And let's see, in the early days of EA, I'd say that I never found a mentor. So it's kind of the major hack for people in their 20s. Find someone generous of spirit who is willing to give to you with nothing in return required. And back then, I wish that I would have started understanding game development earlier. I said either I wish I would have known how to have the designers show me the design docs and mostly the systems, the math systems, and maybe a little programming, but certainly kind of low code, no code scripting.
That's great. Well,
Amazing.
I am going to go take a picture with my co-founder, Chris. It's been 5 years running the business. I can't remember the last time we had an artifact like that. So I'm going to go do that right now.
I'm going to go do that tomorrow. When I left the EA, I was a little too legit, so I didn't take any of the artifacts with me that weren't already in the public domain.
Right.
And I was probably, I just figured that was company ownership, and I probably should have figured out a way to take more stuff with me. But the other thing about longtime friends is you're going to sit with a longtime friend and say, remember that moment, like the moment with a guy named Rich Hilleman, who was the producer on Madden. And I'm sitting there going, I think we need to do this again. And he's going, we were both so pissed off. He says, yeah. And finally I said, we'd buy it. And that was he doesn't remember that soundbite. He remembers the emotion of frustration and sitting around and us talking back and forth. And I remember, we'd buy it. And and so you get together with other friends who are eyewitnesses, and you find out that, in the court of law, the eyewitnesses lie and the artifacts end up being unarguable. So it creates some artifacts. And there's some things, like with that same guy, there was one time we were so frustrated with Madden. The program was doing a bad job, and we had to kind of pay him some milestones along the way that he hadn't deserved. And at one point, I'm sitting there having a one-on-one with somebody who's disappointing me, and it's a little bit tense, and we're in a closed door in a crappy little no window office, and with just little kind of sheetrock walls painted white. Couldn't be more boring with a crappy little table, and I'm sitting across. Yes, you understand this. You understand. And the guy named Rich Hillman, he comes in the door and he walks up to me and he's got a sheaf of papers, which turn out to be all the contract stuff that needs signature. And he says, you need to make this payment. You need to sign this. It's been on your desk. You need to sign this. And he takes it and he starts hitting me on the shoulder with it. And we'd played ice hockey together. And I was already tense. I got up and I almost lost it. I got up, I picked him up by the shoulders and went like this and stuck him into the wall. And then looked at him, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I whoops, shouldn't have done that. Put him down, and he goes, guess I shouldn't interrupt it, should I? I went, no, you shouldn't. Well, the artifact I wish we had is a photo of his body outline in the wall. We both remember it. It sat in the office for another month before a crappy little company could afford to redo a wall. And
you actually put it through the wall. That's crazy.
But without the exact artifact, we each kind of remember the moment in our own way.
Yeah,
that's great.
And we look at it and go, "Wow, your shoulder's in the wall. Oh, but not your head. You didn't put your head. Oh, your elbow. One elbow and another." So, if you capture an artifact, and before long, the people who take 10,000 selfies a year will be able to push a button and get just the good ones to show up.
Yeah, it is imminent. Well, Bing, thank you so much. This has been an incredible marathon, hour and a half. So many stories. I feel like we can go for much longer too, but this is so fun. Thank you for all the advice.
We haven't even talked about any of the game moments.
I know.
I think there's a whole other story. There's a story about every single game where it came from. Have you read Sid Meier's book? So I did a few games with him, and it's interesting what he remembers about some of the games. I remember differently, and I was in the room with them, and I wrote some design docs. And sometimes you need to look at the design docs to actually remember what happened.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we can rope you into a follow-up on game making at some point. I love starting with the marketing piece, which I feel like is I think worked really well for Power World with Pokemon with guns. And it just exploded. But I think more people need to have that.
Yeah, I do think that's underappreciated in the gaming world.
At EA, we invented a term, we called it the marketing X, which is one line and one screenshot that would stand for the whole game.
Well, thank you again, Bing.
Okay.
Eden, do you want
Good
to?
luck with this. Edit away.